Hello, everyone, and welcome to the informational webinar for the community-based strategy of the Kresge Foundation's Climate Change, Health, and Equity Initiative. We've just released a request for proposals, and so we'll be covering information on that today. A brief agenda. We're going to start with the introduction of our teams and then have a general overview of the Climate Change, Health, and Equity Initiative, and then dive deeper into the community-based strategy and the funding eligibility and grant structure and process. After that, we'll have time for question and answers from participants, and then we'll do our final wrap-up. So a brief introduction of the Institute for Sustainable Communities. ISC is serving as the National Program Office for this particular project for Kresge. And the Institute for Sustainable Communities is an international nonprofit that's working to accelerate sustainability solutions in the United States and in Asia. Our mission is to help communities across the world address environmental, economic, and social changes to build a better future that is shaped and shared by all. And to introduce you to our team, first I will introduce myself. I'm Jamie Love. I'm a Senior Program Officer with ISC. We also have on the webcam with us Sarita Turner, who's the Director of Inclusive Communities. We have Nicole Enright, a Program Officer, and also Radia Shabazz, who is our Communications Officer. And this is the team that is working on the Climate Change, Health, and Equity Initiative. At this time, I will turn it over to the Kresge Foundation.
Thank you, Jamie. And hello, everyone. Good morning for those joining us from the West Coast, and good afternoon to everyone else. My name is Shamar Bibbins, and I am a Senior Program Officer with the Environment Program here at Kresge. First, we just want to thank you so very much for joining today's webinar and making the time. My colleagues and I are so excited to launch this new body of work, and we're really grateful for your interest in hearing more about the program. For those of you who may not be familiar with Kresge, Kresge is a national foundation, national private foundation, who works to expand opportunities for low-income communities in American cities. We are based in Southeast Michigan, just outside of Detroit, and our grant making and our social investing takes place across 7 program areas. For this initiative, our environment program and our health program have collaborated for this work. Kresge's environment program is really focused on helping U.S. cities implement comprehensive climate resilience strategies grounded in equity, and our health program works to build equity-focused systems of health that creates opportunities for all people to achieve well-being. Both our environment and our health programs focus their work and view their work through a racial equity lens and share a vision of achieving equitable outcomes in low-income and urban communities. Next slide. So a little bit about the Kresge team who's working on the Climate Change, Health, and Equity Initiative. We have program staff from across both the environment and health programs. Again, my name is Shamar Bibbins with the Environment Program. We also today joined on this webinar my colleague Katie Byerly from the Health Program. We also have Jelon White-Newsome, who is a Senior Program Officer on the Environment Program. And then also in the room with us today, we have Kate McLaughlin, who is a Communications Officer working very closely with our team on this work. In addition, as Jamie mentioned at the top of the webinar, we have partnered with the Institute for Sustainable Communities to really help expand our staff capacity to successfully implement this ambitious body of work, particularly the community-based strategy. And so now I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues, Jelon White-Newsome and Katie Byerly, to share a little bit more about the Climate Change, Health, and Equity Initiative.
Thank you, Shamar, and welcome to everyone. Through the Climate Change, Health, and Equity Initiative, we seek to mobilize a strong constituency for equitable climate action within the healthcare institutions, among health practitioners, and among community-based advocates. For most of you, you might understand that the work that Kresge has been doing over the past 5 years, the investments at this intersection of climate change, health, and equity has been between our environment and health programs. And we believe that climate change is the greatest public health threat of the century. And in addition, we know that climate change doesn't affect everyone in the same way. So many of the social and environmental determinants of health are important, in that people of color and low-income communities face disproportionately negative consequences and unequal harms to public health. Given these imperatives, the health and environment programs wanted to deepen our collaboration, our investments to reduce health inequities and accelerate action on climate change. Next slide, please. This initiative has 3 distinct but aligned strategies, as you'll see in the diagram. The first strategy is focused on healthcare and public health institutions. The second strategy is aimed at healthcare and public health practitioners. And the third strategy is focused on strengthening community-based leadership. And so today's webinar and current funding opportunity is focused on strategy 3. And now I'll turn it to my colleague, Katie.
Thanks, Jalon. We can move to the next slide. Yeah, great. So the goal of the community-based strategy that we're discussing today is really to strengthen leadership among community-based advocates to accelerate the implementation of policies that advance climate resilience and that reduce health risks, while putting equity at the center of this work. So through this effort, we really seek to support multidisciplinary partnerships to accelerate work at that intersection of climate change, health, and equity, and to advance those community-led solutions that demonstrate a deep commitment to racial equity. We also are hoping to accelerate the implementation of policy and public-led processes that improve climate resilience and opportunities for health, and to support the development and implementation of solutions-oriented projects that bring a comprehensive and systems change approach to the work. So now I'm going to turn it back over to our colleagues at the ISC team, who are going to dive in a little bit deeper into all of these elements and discuss some of the eligibility and review criteria, and talk a bit more about the application process. So we look forward to hearing from you at the end and answering your questions along the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. All right, so let's dig into strategy 3, which is strengthening community-based leadership. So strengthening community-based leadership, this is happening in 2 phases for this project. We are currently in phase 1, which is the planning phase, and what this RFP was released for. And we are looking at strengthening the capacity of organizations to accelerate work at the intersection of climate change, health, and equity, and really looking for a comprehensive approach that can address all 3 of these areas. We're looking for organizations and projects that are going to minimize the disproportionate impacts of climate change, that are going to improve opportunities for health in low-income urban communities, and for those that have either existing or developing collaborations among climate advocates, health professionals, and other people in relevant fields. And we also would like to see that organizations have demonstrated accountability to community priorities and advancing equitable outcomes in historically underserved communities. So we're definitely focused on community-based organizations that are grounded and rooted in the community and have the support of the communities that they are serving. So looking at the scope of strategy 3, we know that the lead applicant needs to be a local nonprofit that is community-based and is grounded in the communities being served. Although we expect that this will be multidisciplinary, there does need to be a single lead applicant. The opportunity is focused on cities that have a population of at least 100,000 people, or a metropolitan area with a population of at least 250,000 people. So this is not targeted towards more rural areas or very small cities. The applications from multiple cities will not be accepted. It does need to be a single area that we're looking at. And also, we need a partnership that is working at the intersection, again, of climate change, health, and equity. It must be able to address all areas. We realize that a single organization probably isn't going to have expertise in all of these areas, which is why we anticipate that there will be coalitions or partnerships developed that have multidisciplinary organizations that can come together and work across these 3 sectors. So the lead applicant must be a local 501c3 organization or a fiscally sponsored organization. Universities and government entities are not eligible to apply as the lead applicant, but they can certainly be a part of the partnership. We definitely encourage urban tribal organizations and Native American serving organizations to apply. And we think that the organization should be representative of the community and have a demonstrated track record of commitment and success to working in low-income urban communities. You must have climate or health expertise with a history of equity-focused work. So again, working in one of these two areas, you don't necessarily have to have been working in both climate and health already, but bringing in that other field and already having an equity lens to your work. And you should have existing or developing partnerships across the climate change, health, and equity fields. And the lead applicant must also have an annual operating budget of at least $275,000. And this is because we really want to make sure that organizations can have the ability to manage the full grant award and also to be able to subcontract dollars out to any partner organizations. So the strengths that we're looking for in the lead applicants are organizations that have people of color or Native or Indigenous people in leadership roles, those that can deliver multiple outcomes for historically underserved communities, and that includes things like improved climate resilience, having health benefits, economic opportunities, new community amenities, or improved quality of life. Those that are engaged in or planning to engage in specific public sector-led policy change efforts that address climate change and health and that present an opportunity for influence. And this can be at the local, regional, or state level that these policy changes are happening. And they can be focused on climate change mitigation, adaptation, extreme weather event preparedness, public health issues, transportation planning, and other urban sustainability issues. And the lead applicant should demonstrate a commitment to advancing a comprehensive approach to climate resilience and addressing climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and social cohesion. So taking a look at the grant structure and process. Again, this is a two-phase grant process. We are currently in phase one, the planning grants, which people are applying for now. This will be a 14-month planning grant award, and there will be up to 15 awards made of up to $100,000 each. The grants are going to support the development of multi-year work plans for implementation of policies and public-led processes that advance climate resilience and reduce health risks equitably. We expect that during the planning phase, grantees are going to partner with one or more organizations in their community and be well positioned to advocate for increased resource allocation and equitable climate resilience, to elevate public health impacts of climate change in policy adoption and implementation, and to deepen your involvement and leadership in local, regional, or state level policy and planning efforts. And so supporting community engagement, movement building, and education and leadership activities all would be a part of this planning grant phase. For phase two, the implementation grants, there will be invited applications for up to 12 implementation grants. These will be invited from the 15 planning grants that are awarded, so it is not going to be an open RFP. It will be eligible for the planning grant recipients. And those awards will be up to $200,000 per year for 3 years. So the full applications on this phase one are due by Tuesday, March 19th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. There's only one way to apply, which is through Kresge's online portal called Flux. You can visit the website kresge.flux.io. And if you do not currently have a Flux account, you must create a new account by March 5th in order to be eligible for this round of applications. So the application instructions, once you have registered and logged into the Flux portal, you will see the grant opportunities menu on the left. When you click the button to start a new RFP, and then you will select the CCHE Community-Based Strategy RFP from the drop-down menu as the program that you are applying for. And then proceed to provide the information about your organization and grant requests as outlined in the RFP. And there are several narrative sections that are included in the RFP. You can see that you'll have to answer in the Flux portal. Each applicant is going to describe your organizational qualifications as outlined and provide an overview of how you would use this 14-month planning process to develop a multi-year work plan to accelerate implementation of work at the intersection of climate change, health, and equity in your city or region. So the various application components, once those are, you will submit that information and the required attachments. The narrative, again, is outlined in the RFP. It includes an executive summary, information about your community, your partners and policy efforts, and then your approach. A letter of request, which is going to come from your organization on letterhead, typically signed by your CEO, saying that you are indeed applying for this opportunity. An annual operating budget for your organization, and financial statements. If you have an audit available, that's preferred. If you do not have an audit, we will take other financial reports as well as the IRS 990. And your anticipated project personnel. So looking at your staff, your partners, and other organizations that are going to play significant roles in moving this project forward. And we anticipate that awards are going to be announced in July of 2019. If you make it through this first round in the application process, in April, you will be invited to submit a full RFP, and the full RFP will be due on May 13th. There's several categories that you can use with the funds for the planning grant. Definitely staff or consultant time, your community outreach and communications, any meeting costs, and that can include your space and facilities, food, childcare, transportation, whatever things you need to be able to engage with the community. Any equipment needs related to that, the sub-grants or contracts with your partner organizations, the development and testing of strategy implementation ideas, travel expenses, and that includes your travel to the Kresge-sponsored grantee event that will happen in the fall of 2019. And you can plan into your budget to pay for travel for that, as well as administrative and overhead costs. And it should be noted that Kresge does have a maximum cap for indirect costs at 20%. The grantee expectations during phase 1 of the planning is that you will attend the peer learning event in the fall, and we will invite all grantees to send a team of 2 to 4 people to this event. We're asking that you plan in your budget for no more than $2,000 per person in order to travel to that event, and obviously details of it will come later. To maintain a learning orientation throughout this process. So there will be a cohort of 15 grantees. There will also be an evaluator. We really want all of the grantees to be open to sharing and learning and making sure that you are receiving information from others as well as sharing so that everyone can contribute to the field. Developing a work plan for multi-year implementation. And we're really looking for you to be able to clearly articulate what is the path forward to move on your policy or public-led processes that are going to affect climate change and reduce health risks equitably. Improving and strengthening partnerships across organizations, discipline, and sectors. And also understanding the political will and landscape in your city or region, as well as the barriers and assets that exist to advancing policy. So understanding the political will and really having a grasp on that during this planning phase will definitely help with the implementation and how to move forward with getting traction on accelerating policy work. So the types of proposals that Kresge would fund, they're definitely seeking to address the needs and priorities of low-income residents and communities of color. And so there are certain areas of activity that include community advocacy, policy adoption and civic engagement activities, community training, leadership and development, and that can include climate change education and training, and movement building and activities that accelerate community power building. So there's not specific ideas or only a limited number of projects that Kresge would fund, but things that fall under these activities that really can have a systems change approach and broaden what you're able to accomplish in the policy realm are the types of activities that we're looking for. So there's several things that will be included for competitive proposals that we will be looking for during the review. And that is proposals that will advance public policy or regulatory processes, budgetary frameworks, public financing commitments, and advance comprehensive climate resilience and reduce health risks. So this is really the big policy component. Where is the opportunity to push on implementation of policies, or even when there's opportunity for development of policies that really have the climate to move forward quickly, how can you show that you can have success in moving these policies forward? Proposals that can encompass planning processes such as emergency preparedness or planning for major investments in transportation, water systems, energy, or other utilities. It could focus on other topics such as aging, mental health, workforce or labor, or economic development. So we're again looking for a comprehensive approach that goes across climate change, health, and equity. It could include a variety of local, regional, or state efforts important to climate change, health, and equity, or be focused on a single policy that is primed for opportunity. So there could be multiple policy levers that are prime right now that you want to push on, or there could be a larger single opportunity that your partnership wants to focus on. And also looking for organizations that can lead explicitly with climate change, health, or equity priorities, and can seek to incorporate a more explicit focus on climate change, health, and equity into a policy that could benefit it if it had that lens. So if there's an existing policy that's focused in one of those three areas but doesn't bring the climate change or the health aspect to it, and you can see where you can make those connections and really bring forward that focus to make it more explicit and make it beneficial and equitable across the board, that's the type of change that we're looking for. So there's 5 different areas that we will be reviewing and the criteria that we'll be using during the review process. And that is, number 1, demonstrating a deep commitment to racial equity and clearly articulate how the proposed work will advance equitable outcomes. Number 2, support multidisciplinary partnerships that seek to advance work at the intersection of climate change, health, and equity. And we know that there are some organizations that already have a connection either to a regional or national network that deals with climate change or health. That is certainly very desirable, but not a requirement of this funding. Number 3, advance policy solutions to drive implementation of equitable climate approaches that reduce health risks in low-income urban communities. Number 4, include a systems change orientation. And so we're looking for projects that have both climate adaptation and mitigation strategies and other community benefits that might be increased economic opportunity. It could be improved social cohesion or improved connectivity. And number 5, those that improve climate resilience and opportunities for health. That is the ultimate goal. So just to give an idea of the types of proposals that that would not be funded are those that don't influence a specific climate resilience public policy or public-led process. Again, this focus is on policy change, so it's not on specific on-the-ground interventions and projects. Proposals that are not focused in low-income urban areas with the intent of delivering investments and benefits to improve the community's health. A focus on academic research. Proposals that seek to serve only one neighborhood or a small set of neighborhoods without being able to show how it could grow and have a larger impact beyond those specific areas. A focus on rural geography. Proposals that seek support for organizations that do not have full-time paid staff. This is definitely going to be a big undertaking, and we need organizations that have staff on board that can manage this project. And also proposals that focus on a single intervention rather than having a broader systems change approach. And finally, we would really love for you to come with your ideas. We're looking to hear from the folks who are applying for this process. We want to know that there are creative partnerships that will strengthen diverse organizations that are working at the intersection of climate change, health, and equity. We're looking for innovative community-led solutions that represent new approaches. Perhaps the Kresge team and the ISC team, hasn't heard of some of the things happening on the ground, and this is your opportunity to tell us what's really working. And we're looking for fresh ideas and strategies to help us learn from the field. So we're really excited to learn about the creativity and ideas that you all will bring. So definitely feel free to bring new and innovative ideas into your application. And now I am going to turn it over to Sarita to talk through the question and answers. Hopefully you all have been typing your questions into the question box. If you haven't already, you can start typing those questions, and Sarita is going to turn those over to myself and to the Kresge team.
Thank you, Jamie. We are getting lots of questions, many of them about eligibility. I'm going to just start going through some of them, and then would love to have the Kresge team or ISC folks go ahead and chime in with answers as you see fit. So we did have a question about whether or not an organization can be on more than one application. So I'm assuming that that question is really related to, could the same organization show up in one or more collaborations that are applying?
Thank you, Sarita. So this initiative is really to help foster collaboration and partnership. And so if it's an organization that would seek to be on multiple applications in a particular place, we would really encourage them to think about if there's a way to collaborate with others in that place so that there aren't multiple touch points with that organization on multiple applications. It is not a non-requirement, but we would really ask you to think really long and hard before applying with multiple organizations, as that might be a flag for us, and we would really want to dive into where you feel your interest would lie the most. So please consider hard and long before you actually apply with multiple proposals.
Thank you, Shamar. I also have a question here. If an organization meets all the criteria but doesn't have people of color in leadership, is this application going to be really considered a serious application?
Katie, do you want to address that?
Sure. So there are a number of criteria that you'll see in the RFP that we're putting forth as priorities, but not necessarily requirements. And having leadership in your organization that's really rooted in community and sense of opportunity is really focusing on communities of color and on low-income communities. We want to see ideas that are coming forth and led by those folks in communities. So where it wouldn't be a requirement, the application would definitely still be reviewed and could be competitive, but it is something that we have a priority around funding organizations that are led by people of color.
Thank you. So this question is, I'm going to combine a question about unincorporated communities and population size. There was a question about whether unincorporated communities are eligible, and are the population size minimum for eligible communities? Are there population size minimums, I'm sorry, for eligible communities? So I'm taking that question, this question came from a rural community about population size related to the kind of population density that doesn't exist in some of our rural areas, many of our rural areas. I also want to add on to that question, a question that came in about tribal applications from tribes. So while we're encouraging applications from tribes, many of them do not serve population areas that have 100 to 200,000 as well. They're located in rural areas. So kind of a package of how do rural communities fit into this related to the population requirements?
Sure. So just as a reminder, Kresge's the foundation as a whole is really focused on urban communities. And so this initiative is consistent with the North Star of our foundation, of all of our programming, where we focus in more mid-sized and large cities in the U.S. So with that said, this initiative is not focusing on rural communities. However, we understand that, you know, there are many metro areas, metro regional areas that include unincorporated communities. And so given that the focus here is on shifting policy, either local, regional, or at the state level, we can imagine that there may be proposals that would include county level work, that would include unincorporated communities in that. So that's the first piece around the unincorporated piece. We also do list some thresholds in terms of population and metro regional size in the FAQ of the RFP, so I encourage folks to take a look at those thresholds. As far as what was the second question? I'm sorry.
About, I can take the part on
tribal communities. Yes.
Yeah, and so we do recognize that a number of federally recognized native lands are in more rural areas of the United States, but also recognize that there are really large American Indian and Indigenous populations in the U.S. that do live in American cities. And so we know that there's a lot of practice around climate resilience in those communities, and we're encouraging them to apply. So just to say that there are a large number of American Indian communities that are located in those urban areas as well, and Native serving organizations. And I would just also lift up that there's a lot of kind of these fine details around eligibility, and we want to answer as many of these questions as we can. And we know that it's a lot of detail. So in the package, in the RFP document that we released, there are a number of those kind of nitty-gritty eligibility criteria answers as well in the frequently asked questions section that we would encourage folks to make sure that they take a look at as well, because it might provide some more detail that we're just not able to cover in the time that we have together today.
Great, thank you. I have a question here about federally qualified health centers and if they're able to apply for this opportunity.
Yeah, if you're a federally qualified health center, most are 501c3s, and if, as long as they are, they would be eligible. And I would say that in terms of, if they're a partner or a lead applicant, I think that would really vary by community in terms of what role that FQHC has, and in the community, if they might play a better supporting role or a better lead role. But absolutely, they could be a great health partner.
Great. I had to ask, the question came in as SQHC, if they can apply, and I had to ask, what is that? So great, thank you. Ken, I have a couple of questions here about geography. What is meant by multiple cities, and can an applicant apply to serve an entire county?
So this is, so not an entire county. You can look at policy that would be a county level policy for sure, that would cover the entire county. But when we think about the work rooted in an actual community, there would need to be a community that is identified where the lead organization is working within that county. Right, so you may be in LA County and you may be influencing a county policy, but your work as that community-based organization may be centered in, East LA, or maybe focused in a part of the broader county. So yes, countywide policy and public-led processes can be influenced, but again, because the lead applicants, we're looking for them to be rooted in community and in place. There should be a community or adjacent communities that they're working within a particular county.
Thank you. I have a question here about whether or not colleges and universities are not eligible to apply. That is really clear. But I have a question as to whether or not a 501c3 foundation that is associated with a college or university can apply as the lead applicant.
That's a great question, and likely we would not. They could apply. However, again, in looking and thinking about the criteria of wanting to make sure that we are funding groups that are rooted in community, rooted in a place, they would really have to demonstrate strongly how their work has been impactful to move equitable outcomes in that particular place where that 501c3 foundation works. If it is more or less that they're applying as the foundation arm of the university, then most likely we would not strongly consider that application. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Shamar. I'm also getting a couple of questions about whether or not a statewide organization might apply that has local affiliates in a community. So could that statewide agency apply on behalf of the local affiliates? Maybe the local affiliates don't have the budget size requirements of the RFP, that kind of thing.
It's another great question. We've gotten a couple of these questions about the connection between the national and the local. The lead applicant really should be a community-based organization. Again, the partnership can influence statewide policies, and it can be a statewide collaboration, but that has very direct linkage and roots in a community. But we are really looking to strengthen capacity of community-based organizations that are rooted in a place. So if it were a statewide collaboration that was for putting the proposal through one of their place-based partners, then that's more of what we be in line with the guidelines of the initiative.
Great, thank you. I'm just looking here and wanting to remind everyone, I'm looking at the questions and wanting to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded. is going to be made available to everyone that registered and everyone that received an email of this funding opportunity, either from Kresge or ISC. So you will be able to access the webinar fully recorded in the future. And so I'm seeing a question here about natural disaster preparedness training programs, and whether or not that would be a considered to be a competitive application. The program is for youth of color who live in low-income communities along the U.S. hurricane belt.
So if it were a standalone activity or strategy specifically around strengthening this particular training program, that would not be aligned with the scope of what we're looking for. If a strengthening that program was an activity of a broader scope of work that really sought to influence a broader policy play that they could move over, ideally 1 to 3 years, then that is the scope of what we would be looking for. So the strengthening that training, we imagine that there would be all sorts of training and education and leadership development activities as a part of the broader work. But ultimately, this initiative is to accelerate the implementation of policies that improve climate resilience and also reduce health risks. So at the end of the planning phase, we would want organizations to have identified that policy play that would be able to be implemented over a 1 to 3 year time span in the implementation phase. So only focusing on just a training program, albeit sounds like a really important training program, could not only be the singular focus of the broader initiative, of the broader proposal, I'm sorry.
Great, thank you. I also have a question here about how this particular funding opportunity is different than Kresge's Building Place-Based Opportunity Ecosystems RFP.
Yeah. Sure. So Kresge has a number of open opportunities for funding right now. This one is through our health and our environment programs. The place-based ecosystems opportunity that's referenced here is through our human services program. So we would encourage you, as you think about applying for any of these opportunities, to really dig into the request for proposals that's been released and see which one fits the work that you're doing best. There are a number of opportunities. The foundation is obviously aligned in some of the work that we're trying to drive forward around equity and around collaborative processes. But again, this initiative or this funding opportunity is really around bringing together climate change, health, and driving equity forward through those collaborations. So we would encourage you to look at those requests for proposals and see which one might best suit your organization based on what you're working on.
Thank you. And I have a question here about evaluation. Will Kresge be providing an evaluator, or are the applicants required to provide evaluators in their individual applications?
We have partnered with a evaluation team to do a developmental evaluation of the initiative overall. We will not be providing evaluation at the site level for the different places where we fund, but we will be working and are already working with an evaluator at the initiative level to really understand, how change takes place in place, but it will not be site specific, if you will, on each particular place's work.
Great. Will vulnerability assessments of health impacts of climate change be required for the urban community that applies? If so, will they be evidence-based and include the housing and building sector?
Mm-hmm. So we will not be requiring a vulnerability assessment, if you will, as a part of your application, but fundamentally, what this work is we are looking for places where there already really is some traction around work and organizations that really want to accelerate their work at the intersection of climate change, health, and equity. So from our standpoint, what that would mean is that the sites that are applying would have already done or have knowledge of the vulnerabilities, of the climate vulnerabilities and the health impacts in their place. So we're looking for proposals that can really articulate that problem statement that they're trying to solve for, and how the development or of deepening partnerships, whether it's bringing in a climate part, or deepening your climate components of your work, or deepening the public health components of your work, how that would really address solving the problem statement that you would be articulating to us. So this is not about, this initiative is not really designed to, start your vulnerability assessment process. We would be looking for sites that already have a really clear sense of the vulnerabilities of the people that they're working with in the place.
Great, thanks, Shamar. Do applicants need to know the specific policy that they would advance at the time of their application, or is that part of the planning grants discovery process?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is a part of the discovery process. We don't expect in this stage, at the proposal stage, for you to have an absolute clear-cut, exact identification of that policy. But again, similar to the problem statement and that you're seeking to solve, we are looking for some understanding of what's in the pipe. What's the policy? What could the policy play be? What's right? What would be opportunities for influence? And then the planning phase really is to think about, are these the right pathways? Or if you identify a couple of pathways, which would be the most impactful pathway? What partnerships that you need to be successful? So the planning phase is to do some discovery around partnerships, but also the policy and political environment.
Great, thank you. I'm still getting a fair number of questions about the multiple cities piece. So I have a really specific question that I'll read about, do you mean multiple disconnected cities? This potential applicant is working to develop a watershed level social resilience practitioners network across 21 communities. Would something like that be eligible?
21 communities in a particular place, in a county?
A particular region, in a region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, were you going to answer? Yes, but
yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking really good. Yes.
Yeah, I was like, yeah.
Yes, but again, I think the clarity here is, what would be the long-term systemic transformational policy driver that would help implement, like if this policy was implemented at that regional scale, how would that actually influence and impact those places? The proposal could not only focus on simply implementing a program across these 21 places, it has to be attached to a broader policy play that would, if implemented, or as they would work to implement, that would drive a different level of investment, a different level of resources to be able to put into play this longer term program in an equitable way in these communities. So I hope that provides a little bit more clarity.
Thank you. I have a question here about phase 2 after the planning grant. Is there information available about how large those implementation grants will be?
Sure. The implementation grants will be up to $200,000 over 3 years. And we will be looking to fund up to 12 sites during the implementation phase.
And I think it's important to note that those that are funded during the implementation phase will be based on the grantees that are selected during the planning phase.
Yes. Yes.
So the planning, the implementation funding is connected to the planning funding.
Yes.
So to be eligible for the implementation phase, you would need to be selected in this initial open call for planning grants.
Great, thank you. I also have had a couple of questions about whether U.S. territories like Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands are eligible to apply.
Yes, they are.
Great. I'm just looking here to see, we have some questions here that have already been answered, so I don't want to re-ask those. This kind of leads back to the question about whether or not the policy that the applicants will work on has to be predetermined. There's a question here about, and I think you gave some good information about this in your response to that earlier question, but maybe if you can elaborate a little more on how developed a project should be for the merge submission. Like what actually might happen, what could an applicant expect to be building out during the planning phase?
Sure. So I'll work backwards, maybe. So at the end of the planning phase, what we would consider to be a successful planning phase would be for the partnership to have developed a work plan that really clearly articulates the process and the path forward to influence the identified policies that they have, the policies that they have identified, so that at the end of so that they would use the 1 to 3 years of the implementation phase to execute to lead towards implementation. So meaning, so if that is where you would be at the end, right? You have to have a very clearly identified policy play, articulate who you would work with, the pathway forward, and the opportunity over 1 to 3 years that will accelerate implementation of these policies and public-led processes. So at this stage, we would be looking for, again, not a clearly, like you have some discovery time during the planning phase, that is the process, but we want to know what the opportunity is in your place. This is not necessarily the planning phase is not the opportunity to think about where you could develop a policy. It's for us, we want to know what's happening in the place where you are based on this is the problem from a climate and health aspect. These are the partnerships that we would need to build and to strengthen to move these types of opportunities over 1 to 3 years. So we want to have some sense that you understand the political environment in your place, that you understand what's in the pipe that could likely be a movable and influenceable policy play, policies that have been adopted or are on the verge of adoption that with additional advocacy by your partners would actually drive that adoption over, or a policy perhaps that was just adopted that you want to now establish, making sure that there is an equitable implementation process to those policies. So we want to have some sense that you have an understanding of what's right, what's happening, and what's ready to move, right? And from an implementation standpoint, what's on the verge of being able to be adopted, and that your work and your advocacy with your partnerships would actually accelerate that. So that's the type of analysis or thought that we would be looking for in this phase. And then the planning phase really is to do deeper discovery on, are we going to focus just maybe on this one opportunity, on our regional transportation plan? I'm just throwing some, just as an example. Or if you've maybe identified a suite of things, are we, is it going to be one or two of those? So that's the time over the planning phase to really think about the process and the pathway. So in the proposals at this stage, we will be looking for some sense of the policy environment, the public-led process, the environment, and what's already happening in your place and what you're able to move, what you would be able to move or would like to move with additional partnership and resources. Sarita, I think you're on mute, perhaps?
I was coughing, so I put myself on mute, and then I forgot to take myself off. um, Staff time for implementation, can that be folded into this particular RFP, or is it purely planning?
Katie, you want to take that?
Sure, yeah. Staff time can definitely be a piece of what the grant funds are used for. And we know the line right between planning and implementation, as we have it laid out in kind of this two-phase grant making approach, we know that line is not like, oh, I am planning and now we're implementing. We know that there's so much overlap and that there's a lot of work that happens across those two phases. So, you know, there might be opportunities during this planning phase to do some, to start some activities that that would be part of what could be considered implementation. So that makes sense to us, and we would just want you to articulate that to us in your proposal. And there's a list in RFP 2 of sort of those other allowable uses of funds that are a part of this opportunity. Is there anything else you'd add?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, just that you can there may be some testing, right, or
testing,
some
that's a good word. Thank you.
That folks may want to do. We understand that different projects may be at different levels of readiness or ripeness, and so definitely there may be some implementation, quote unquote, aspects of the work during the planning phase.
Great. So I just want to remind folks that there's a pretty extensive FAQ that has been developed as a part of this process. And I'm seeing lots of questions that I know are answered in it. So I want to encourage you, we want to encourage you to read it. And we're going to focus on the questions here that maybe are not as so called out in the FAQ. So I have a question here about whether or not, Shamar, I think you've been super clear that this is about urban communities. I have a question here about ex-urban communities that are part of an urban MSA, and thinking about the context of growing suburban poverty and how displacement has kind of reshaped the urban footprint, and what Kresge is thinking about that in terms of this particular opportunity.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really important issue, a really important question. But again, just to reiterate, this initiative really is focused on low-income urban communities as we define it in the FAQ in terms of population size. It's not focused on kind of the suburban rural connection.
Great.
I guess all I would add to that is that we do know that in some of the large urban communities there are, you know, you may not technically be part of the city of LA, and it's still very much a city that is a part of it. So I would encourage folks to look at the kind of the guidelines that we have more specifically laid out. But again, the opportunity is not for rural communities, as the foundation focuses on cities, and to think about kind of the comprehensive partnership approach that we're hoping this opportunity will drive. So if there are those, we know that the impacts of climate, right, are also linked in place. So I think that there's an opportunity for folks to drive forward some collaborative partnerships that really do focus on a city in place. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. So I am still getting a lot of questions about the people of color in leadership of an organization. And so I know that you've answered it and said it's not a criteria that is specifically called out in the RFP, but that it is a lens and value that the Kresge Foundation holds for this project. And so some of the questions I'm getting are about what exact positions do they need to be in, Does it include board members? Does it include part-time staff? Just kind of quite a few questions still about that. Is there anything more that you all want to say about that particular piece?
Sure, it's definitely, especially since you just want to just add some clarity. So again, to Sarita, to your point, you're right. We called it out as a value because it is a value of how Kresge, the foundation overall, leads its work in terms of equitable outcomes, ensuring that, increasingly ensuring that communities, that organizations that are led by people of color and have people of color in leadership roles, we see that as one way that organizations can demonstrate their commitment to equity. We know there are many ways in which organizations can demonstrate their commitment to equity, but we thought it was important to call that out because that is a value of our teams, but also of the foundation overall. So I would be less concerned for folks who may be concerned about that, about thinking about, oh, does it have to be the board or you know, a certain position? And I would say really focus your attention on helping us understand how your organization and your partnerships have demonstrated commitment to equitable outcomes in low-income communities. How have you done that? How are you doing that? Maybe if representation is not as strong in your organization or your partnership, maybe, you know, helping us understand, are there particular approaches that you're taking or work that you're doing to strengthen that? I think those are the components that are more important for us. We know that representation is an important part and an essential part, but it's not, we know there are many ways, right, that equity shows up across the organization in terms of outcomes. So I think that's what I would say here. Again, it's not a requirement, but we did include it, as we have many other things around things that we would encourage. Katie, is there anything else you might want to say about that?
No, I think that definitely strikes home.
Great.
Thank you. So I have a really specific question that I'm going to read here about the type of work that an organization does. It says, my organization is more of an implementer than a policy advocacy group. However, we are in the very early stages of trying to build collaborations with public health and sustainable development organizations in some of our service areas because we see opportunities for systemic change in how affordable housing retrofits are addressed. Are we too early in our process for this, or even too late to apply for this type of grant?
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the partnership piece, you know, we're looking for kind of both and. We're looking for, you know, existing multidisciplinary partnerships that are already working at the intersection of climate change, health, and equity, but we're also looking for forming partnerships at this intersection, right? And so among organizations who might be currently leading climate work and want to bring in the health or equity dimensions of their work much stronger because of opportunities that they've identified. And so I would say no, so I would say yes. You know, it's right. This opportunity could be right for you. And I think, again, it's just about helping us understand those opportunities that you've identified, how it would strengthen the work at this intersection. And then we, of course, would be looking for some clarity around how the partnership is coming together, or how you see forming that partnership, and more importantly, during or strengthening the formation of that partnership during the planning phase.
Thank you. I've had a couple of questions as to whether or not different configurations of governmental offices can be a partner in a collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah,
great.
Yes.
And I've also had a question. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to call out one small thing about that. We call out very specifically that we're looking for multidisciplinary partnerships, but we should also be really clear cross-sectorial as well. We don't explicitly call that out for government entities, you know, for partners from the private sector. We definitely would encourage, you know, multi-sector, multidisciplinary as well. if that makes sense for, obviously, for the applicant.
Yeah, thank you. Would you consider work in prisons with incarcerated populations as a group that you would prioritize or include in this effort?
That's a really good question. Yes, I mean, I think we would want to understand how, better understand how that work would shape up and what the vision is, but we would not exclude that population.
Yeah, I think one thing that stands out to me in that question is you all obviously know the communities that you're working in better than we would based kind of on just that tidbit of information. And so as Shamar said a couple of times, it's in the proposal process, the more that we can kind of understand the context of the community in which you're working and the opportunity that you've identified, or the kind of the couple of opportunities that you know exist, and how you could see a pathway forward working with these partners to move on that policy opportunity, whether it's to move it over the finish line passing, or to further implement it more successfully and more equitably. That is really something that I think will help us to better understand the work that you're doing through the proposal process.
Yeah, I think about you're talking, it just makes me think, really clear, and we spelled this out in the RFP, but helping us understand, who the community, who is the community you're serving, the population, the problem statement around climate and health, what are you trying to solve for, and how, at the end of the day, at the end of the planning phase, if you will, how will these partnerships embedded in these policy environments or frameworks that you will be advancing, how will that really accelerate work at the intersection of climate change, health, and equity? So those are all components that are essential to help us understand the vision for how you would execute the work in place.
Thank you. I have a technical question here. This potential applicant has multiple partners to build out their collaboration that will be a part of the project. Will the Flux system allow multiple credentials for access and input, or would the credential be only for one agency?
That's a great question. Shamar's just looking at me like, you have to answer that.
I'm like,
So the Flux system, as I understand it best, is that one person is able to access the record that you're working on. What I know that other past folks who have applying is that they share those login credentials among a group. I think that online application systems are, they just don't work as well as humans together, So I would encourage folks, I think, if you're working really collaboratively, maybe starting out in something like a Google Doc or some way that you can share that information is probably very honestly, probably going to be the easier way. And then once you're ready to put it into the Flux system, you're able to transfer those responses and those answers. And as always, we encourage people to save frequently, save often in the Flux system. And it's pretty good. It's pretty good in terms of keeping information that's there, but I just always, it pains me when you lose information that are in online systems. So we don't want that to happen to anyone.
Yeah, I think it would be really challenging for us to have multiple credentials for multiple partners. And we've had partnerships in the past that we funded. And so one of the ways we tried to solve for that is in our comprehensive document application guide, we actually have the questions that you'll be asked, the narrative questions that you will be asked in Flux with word counts and character limits, so that way collaborations and partners can actually share that amongst each other, and try to have some process before you actually have to get to the system to put things in.
Yeah, and that's what when we talk about the lead applicant, I think it's a good point to clarify, that's the applicant who's showing up and taking the lead and applying through Flux. So when we were expressing about the lead applicant, that's the organization that we would see as the grantee in the Flux system, and that just helps us to distinguish who that organization is. And just to reiterate, there's a deadline to register in Flux. So if you're not already registered and when you're planning on applying, go ahead and head to the website and get your registration in so you can get all of your account kind of technical aspects of that taken care of.
By March 5th?
Yes, I believe it is March 5th.
Great, thank you. I have a question here from the great state of California, where both Nicole and I live. The question is about, and it's applicable to many places, especially many of our coastal cities. The question is, in California cities, the affordable housing crisis presents a major challenge to equity. While the state is investing in low-income communities most impacted by climate through the Transformative Climate Communities program, the risk is that these significant investments lead to gentrification, also associated with displacement of low-income families. Would a focus on planning for displacement avoidance be considered a creative approach?
It's a great question.
It's a really great question, and I paused because it is a great question, and it's come up in all of our work repeatedly. I think, so again, I want to just get back to the core. If there is a strong policy play that the partnership believes it can accelerate work at this intersection, and there is a really ripe opportunity to drive a more explicit policy agenda that will lead to implementation over the next 1 to 3 years, I would say yes. I think displacement and the intersection of climate resilience and displacement housing, we know is critically important in all of our cities across the country. And I would just encourage the interested applicant to really think about what are the partnerships that are already in place, and are there partnerships that can be put further in place, particularly from the public health standpoint, that would actually accelerate this work. Because I think it is a critically important piece, but it would have to really be, I think, just thoughtful about the transformational impact that the work was trying to move, and what would be the material reductions in climate disruption, as well as the reduction in health risks that will be put in place through that work. So that's kind of a long-winded answer. I mean, but fundamentally, yes. And again, I would just encourage the groups to really think about, in the confines of this initiative, based on what the criteria we're looking for, to be, just honest if whether that particular piece of work fits into this initiative.
Yeah. I think the only piece that I would add too is that's why we've put a real focus on equity in this work, because we know that through policy there are often unintended impacts, or, in some policies in our history, things that were plainly put in to disadvantage communities of color and low-income communities. And so that's why we've really put equity as a key pillar in this work as well, to drive forward implementation that takes into account possible risks of gentrification and displacement in different things, and other impacts as well that might be going on. So we're just also really keying on that aspect of equity in this too.
And the question, specifically called out the Climate Transformative Communities program. So if there is an opportunity within the implementation of that work to form partnerships of folks working on that work, that would have a more explicit play around the displacement dimensions, but again, within the confines of accelerating work at the intersection. I think that is the type of policy opportunity anyway that leads to a more equitable implementation of what we would be looking for. But again, would need to have all the other components as well.
Great, thank you. Would an application that packages various approaches tailored to fit the specific needs of various communities while all coming under the umbrella of systemic change and climate resiliency be competitive?
I think I lost the question. Can you repeat that a little bit, Sarita?
Yes. An application that might package together different approaches in different communities, in a collection of different communities, while all still falling under the umbrella of systemic change and climate resiliency, would that be competitive?
I think the question would be different communities. Are the different community, if the communities are within the same metro region, yes. But if the communities are different communities within a state, then likely not.
Yeah, and I would also, from what I kind of, one thing I think I heard in that question and something to lift up is, we're looking for a collection of something that drives at a specific policy target. And we know that there are often really important projects or programs or activities that are a piece of that that could be funded through this opportunity. And in your proposal, we would need to understand how those things really tie into the policy piece that you're moving forward. So, there are so many really important and really innovative projects or programs kind of as standalones that are happening out there around climate and health. And I think for this opportunity, we want to be able to understand how those efforts might be able to come together to drive forward a broader policy systems transformation in a place.
Great, thank you. Can applicants who apply for and are awarded this phase 1 planning grant opportunity in their phase 2 application add in additional partners, or are they limited specifically to the collaboration that they put together during phase 1 in an application for phase 2?
I think we would want to have a sense of who potentially additional partners may be, or you might imagine would be in the implementation phase. We are, you're not bound limited to only the partnerships that you identify in the planning phase. However, to completely, kind of rejigger your partnership, from planning to implementation would not be looked upon well, but we definitely imagine that there would be other partnerships that need to be brought in, and so we would want to have a sense of, who those might be, even if they are not, in the planning phase identified, but who would those other likely partnerships be, and then what the status of those relationships look like.
Great. You mentioned earlier that there should be a specific focus on a specific city or urban community, and later noted that the proposal should be able to show potential for growth and be applied to other cities. Should a strong proposal focus then on one case study with the intention to adapt and grow into new communities?
So just for clarification, the focus of the planning phase and the implementation phase would be on a particular place, a particular city, or groups of communities within the metro region, which, as we've described. The work is not in implementation to become a model for another place. I just want to clarify that. The full breadth of work in planning and implementation should be focused on the identified communities that were identified in the planning phase. Now, as a overarching initiative, what Kresge is most interested in is really elevating the different approaches that we will be learning from in partnership with these places to help the broader field understand, how different approaches and models based on work that is being executed across these sites. But for the implementation and planning phase for this particular opportunity, we're expecting that these partnerships are working in those places, in those communities that they've identified during this planning phase. Sarita, is there further clarification based on how you read the question? I just want to make sure I'm understanding that correctly.
I think that provided good clarification. And then I just want to also add that I have had a question about if folks have follow-up questions or think of other questions, how might they get those answered after the webinar is over?
Absolutely. So, Jamie, do you want to address that question?
Sure. It will actually, it's going to be on the last slide as well, but there is an email address, which is climatehealth@kresge.org. And if you email that, either someone from the ISC team or the Kresge team will be able to get back with you. And we will also continue to update the FAQs as part of the application sheet. So you will see a date when new answers have been added so that you can see that as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I also have a question here that is really tied to the fact that this is really about policy change and systems change, this effort, and whether or not lobbying is allowable with the grant resources.
So all of the work within this initiative has to take place within a C3 capacity. This does not support C4 work. So within the confined, your policy advocacy work has to fall within the bounds of C3 regulations and guidelines.
Great, thank you. This is a question from the FAQ that this person is asking for clarification about that. I just want to kind of reiterate that I know you've answered it once, and but I want to cover it again just because it came up again and they're kind of quoting from the FAQ. Would you consider organizations that work primarily in a rural setting to benefit urban low-income communities? So the FAQ says no. And does this mean projects outside a city center, but that primarily benefit the city residents, would not be considered?
This may be one of those questions that we have to address offline, but particularly when we think about metro regions, there are urban cores where a community, where that may be the focus of the work. This organization works in this urban core, but it's also in a metro region or a county where some of their activities actually span what's outside of that urban core. That to me would be the distinction. The organization is rooted in the urban core. Their work is focused on residents and community members in that core. And because it's in a metro region or a county, there may be some activities that span what's outside of that. That to me, that would be within the bounds of this work. But for organization to primarily be rooted or focused in a rural community and vice versa, I think that is a little bit of a distinction. And so if it's not quite clear and you still have questions about this particular piece of work, because there's a little bit of a nuance there, I would encourage the individual to reach out to the Climate Health email, and then we can be more specific about that particular question. But overall, it's not focused on rural communities, the initiative.
Great, thank you. Would a competitive proposal necessarily need to have a health practitioner or is it enough to have a health institution as a partner?
Yeah, we think that within the partnerships, we want to see that individuals and organizations from climate-focused places, health-focused organizations are working together in partnership. So you don't necessarily need, an MD or a nurse or somebody from a public health department to be an individual working on there, but we do want to see those collaborations happening across organizations and institutions.
And when we say health partner, we are, we defer to the community to decide who their health partner is. So it could be, as Katie said, it could be a public health department, it could be an institution, it could be an academic institution that has a public health institute, it could be a community health network. So we are actually, we're looking for the applicants to really define what that health partner looks like in their place.
Yeah, and I would say I would encourage folks, we have kind of how the Kresge Foundation thinks about health in the FAQ, and our perspective on health is really based on the social determinants and thinking about those aspects in addition to clinical care that support folks to achieve health and well-being as it's defined within their community. So I would encourage folks to take a peek at that too as they think about their health partner.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for your wonderfully creative and great questions. And we're out of time now for questions. So I'm gonna turn it back over to Jamie, I think, and she's gonna help you understand how the questions that we didn't get to, because there are quite a few of them, are going to be handled.
Yes, so our questions, if your specific question was not answered, or even if it was answered, we will be updating the application guide and the FAQs to incorporate all of that information. So the questions that were answered today will be on there, and the ones that are still here, we're going to capture and make sure that we have answers for, and that will be updated and sent out along with the recording of the webinar. So be on the lookout for that next week. And just a few final reminders. Also, of course, with that, if you have questions that you didn't think of and you still need more clarity on, feel free to email the climatehealth@kresge.org. So just a couple final reminders. Your Flux registration is due by March 5th. So please make sure you go onto the system and get yourself an account, so that you will be eligible to submit the application. The full applications are due on March 19th by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And those who are selected to move on to the next phase will be invited in mid-April to submit a full proposal. And those full proposals will be due on May 13th by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you can be on the lookout for that notification if you have submitted for the planning grant proposal. Again, you can visit kresge.org/CCHE to download the full application packet if you don't already have it. Make sure you refer to the FAQs and the definitions in there, and just really read the application packet thoroughly, because there are a lot of questions that are answered specifically in there as well that we may not have covered today. And all of the information will be sent out to everyone who is registered. So we thank you very much for your participation and hanging on with us, and look forward to receiving all of the creative and innovative proposals that come in. So thank you.